Blessings and welcome to the path to freedom, to yet another space of us expanding our consciousness, raising our vibration so that we may soar, so that we may forever shine, so that we may forever glow in ever expanding ways, so that we may forever allow for the next iteration, the next version of who we are to emerge with ever expanding ease and grace, and that we may allow for the good that we desire to come into our experience, to emerge from within us, also with ever expanding ease and grace. My name is Daniel Roquillo, and as always, thank you so much for tuning in, for joining me into this space, for doing this work, for being willing, for being courageous enough to do this work, because it takes courage to walk this path. It is not for the faint of heart, as the expression goes. And that's no judgment, that's merely an observation that all of us are called to walk this path. Few of us are hearing that call, and even fewer of us are answering that call. And if you're listening to this, I would take that to mean that you are answering this call, so thank you so much. So this beautiful path that we are walking, that we are traveling, it is not a smiles only path. This is not a path where everything is just dandy from morning to night, from day to day, from month to month, from year to year. But inevitably, we move through spaces where there's turbulence. We move through spaces where we will be challenged, where we come face to face with challenges which are not God on our case in any way, shape, or form. It's not, we're not being punished, we're not being tested, we're not being tried. We don't need to ever qualify ourselves or deem ourselves or prove ourselves worthy. But these beautiful challenges, they are gifts and blessings of transformation, stepping stones. What's the word? It doesn't matter what the word is. Inviting us to go deeper, to go wider, to go higher. Inviting us to release and let go of something that we need to release and let go of, so that we may fly even higher, so that we may soar even higher, so that we may expand our consciousness, so that we may raise our vibration even more. As we are moving through these spaces, and I remember in the beginning for me, how whenever I would move into, and we can call these spaces chemicalization, we can call them the dark night of the soul. There are different names for it, and there are different gradations to it. But I remember in the beginning when I moved through these spaces where I felt off, it felt as though I was about to crawl out of my skin. It did not feel pleasant at all. So it can be that kind of space, or we're moving into a space, an external condition and circumstance, as is the case right now in the world, where there's so many things happening. When there's so much going on, there's so much suffering, there's so much coming to the surface, so many things that we get to become aware of that is needed for the human consciousness, the collective human consciousness, to release and let go of. So there are wars, there's greediness, there's stinginess, there's violence, there's all these things happening. A whole lot of things happening. Whatever we are moving through, be it an internal challenge or be it a condition outside of us that we find ourselves hijacked by judgments and opinions, where we find ourselves hijacked by thinking that this should not be. We are so wise, as we have been talking about so much before. All of this work, much of this work, actually all of this work rests on two pillars. Walking this beautiful path of freedom, it rests on two pillars. So there's the pillar of presence, where we get to come back to witnessing and observing our minds, to release our attachments to the stories, to the judgments, to the opinions, to the thoughts as to what should and should not be, the beliefs, whatnot. And then there's the pillar of trust. The pillar of trust, where we get to do the work, trusting that even now, and this is actually the topic for today, that even in the midst of this, even in the midst of this, all is still well. It doesn't mean that all is good. It's not good that people are being killed. It is not good that people are suffering. War is not good on some level. But from the greater scheme of things, from a higher perspective, from a higher vantage point, the only thing that is happening is this loving presence. We can call it that, we can call it God, we can call it the universe, we can call it spirit, we can call it whatever we want to call it. But it is the only thing that is happening. It is the creator, it is the creation, it is every space, every place, every being, every moment, every object. It is the all in all, it is the one, it is the whole. There is nothing outside of this loving presence, nothing outside of it. We can call it energy, and most of us are more or less familiar or tuned into the realization that energy is everything. That energy cannot be destroyed, it cannot be created. It is everything. It is everything. So we can call it energy. So this loving presence, it is all there is. And it is always benevolent. So this pillar of trust, we can break it down into three smaller pillars that is sustaining the pillar of trust. So there's a structure being built here. Kind of like when we're building a house. We first need to have the foundation, and then we can raise the walls and the ceilings and the roofs and the windows and everything onto that foundation. So there's trust, and then underneath trust, that is the realization that this loving presence is all there is. That it is good, that it is benevolent. That's the second pillar. That it is always for itself. And the third pillar, that it is always expressing itself perfectly. So divine and perfect action is always happening, divine and perfect activity is always happening, divine and perfect timing is always happening. Nothing ever happens out of chance or luck. There are no mistakes in this loving presence. There is no randomness. There is no meaninglessness. But everything has a meaning, everything has a place, everything has a space, everything has a purpose, and it is all designed with divine perfection. There is only divine perfection. So we get to trust these three. And then when we move into challenges, and I know that the mind, for many of us, is very good, it's very apt at conjuring us into judgments and fears and worries and doubts, into resisting that which is, saying that this should not be, this is not supposed to be. And while these are normal human reactions, none of them serve us. When we move into resistance, when we become like reactionary, mindless drones, just being pulled into whatever story or whatever belief that the world is suggesting to us, based on what is what we become aware of through our physical senses, we lose our ability to serve the emerging world. We lose our ability, whenever we are pulled into the ditches, we lose our ability to serve the emerging world. We lose our ability to midwife the new. As that wonderful statement goes, we need to be the change we wish to see. If we are hijacked by fear, by worry, by doubt, by a sense of not being enough, by a sense of, or by a perception of judgments and opinions, we are not serving the emerging. It is not until we pull ourselves out of it, it is not until we raise ourselves up onto a higher level of vibration, that we are actually serving the emergence of the new world. And so we get to remind ourselves that even in the midst of this, even in the midst of this calamity, even in the midst of this suffering, even in the midst of this turbulence, this chaos, all at a deep, profound level, from the highest perspective, all is still well. And what that brings us is a sense of peace, a sense of harmony. When we trust that this loving presence is still here, even in the midst of this loving presence is. When we trust that even in the midst of this loving presence is always, now, forever, for itself, good, benevolent, moving itself toward the highest possibility, toward the highest good. When we trust that even in the midst of this, divine perfection is happening, that this is divine perfection expressing itself, we may not be able to see how this is perfection expressing itself right now, but we can still trust that it is. And eventually, as every challenge is a gift and a blessing of transformation, every time we come face to face with the lower vibrations, every time we come face to face with something that rubs us the wrong way, when we are pulled into reactions, mental, emotional, that's an invitation for us to release and let go of our judgment, to release and let go of our attachment to what should and should not be, to release and let go of our attachment to the content that flows through our minds, so that we may raise ourselves up. Because it is fully possible, it is fully and completely possible to be in a turbulent condition, to be in a challenge, to be facing external conditions that are perhaps not to our liking, that are perhaps not to our preference, but it is fully possible for us to be in those spaces and still be in peace, still be in harmony, still be in love, still be kind, still be generous, still be compassionate. It's not only possible, it's a mandate that we have. It is required of us to move out of being, and I know that how this may sound, but it's a term that's been coming to me quite strongly lately. So please do not take this as a judgment. It's only a way to illustrate how many of us humans are walking like mindless drones, sleepwalking, just allowing whatever conditions and circumstances to toss us into whatever feeling. If it's a good condition, we're being pulled into joy and happiness, into the high vibrations. If it's a seemingly bad situation or condition, we're being pulled down or dragged down into the lower vibrations. But for us to serve and for us to be, and this is what this path is about. It is about us allowing for ever expanding, allowing ourselves to be in ever expanding peace and love and joy in conditions, not conditions, harmony and wholeness and abundance and beauty and all of these, regardless of our conditions, regardless of our circumstances, regardless of what is happening, what is going on around us, what is going on within us. That is how we're setting ourselves free. So we need to take back our minds. We need to do the inner work necessary to find our way back to trusting that all is well. That all is well. I was asked recently, because I say that a lot. I use those words a lot. That's one of my, actually, that is my number one go-to affirmation. All is well. Sometimes I add that, peace be still, if my mind is really in turmoil and uproar. And so I say that a lot. I say that to myself a number of times every day, and pretty much any conversation I have, if it's a client or a class that I'm teaching, those words come, they just find their way into my vernacular, into my vocabulary. All is well. So I was asked recently, but what does that mean? Yes, I know the words, but what does it feel like to know that all is well? And that's such a beautiful question. So whenever we are in joy, we are in the feeling tone that all is well. Whenever we are in harmony, in peace, in love, in wholeness, in bliss, in happiness, then we are in the vibration of knowing that all is well. Whenever we are hanging out in those higher vibrations where we're so content is not necessarily the right word, but when we are non-attached to resistance, when we're non-attached to judgments, when we're not thinking or wishing or hoping that things were different, but when there's a sense of peace of being right here, right now, with everything that is here and now, that is knowing that all is well. And that is how we serve. That is how we midwife this new, not only in the new world, but also the next iteration, the next version of who and what we are. It is normal for the human mind. It is normal for content to flow, judgmental content to flow through the mind. And we can either be hijacked by it, or we can move into a space which is the second pillar, or the other pillar of this path to freedom, into a space of being grounded and centered and anchored in the nowness of this moment, where we get to observe the content that is flowing through our minds. So it's not about getting rid of the judgments, primarily. It is not about getting the mind to shut up, primarily. It is not about us turning away or running away or pretending that we're not experiencing judgments and opinions, primarily. But it is primarily about us witnessing and observing it, embracing and allow whatever content is flowing through our minds to be what it is, to be as it is. And then from that space of not being attached, from that space of not being identified, we now get to turn our attention toward what we wish to experience. So we get to look for the abundance that is everywhere. We get to look for the peace that is everywhere. We get to consciously choose to lean into the tools and the practices that bring us into the feeling tone that all is well. And one of them is reminding ourselves that even in the midst of this, all is well. Even in the midst of this challenge, there's a gift and a blessing of transformation. Even in the midst of this challenge, something wonderful is happening. And even in the midst of this challenge, this condition, this circumstance, everything is working for my personal good and for the highest good of all. So we get to remind ourselves of this. But for us to be able to remind ourselves of this, we first need to be more or less steeped in the trusting that God is all there is, that God is good, that God is expressing himself perfectly, always, now, forever. And we need to have a more or less habitual practice of coming back to the nowness of this moment, of breaking free from time, of releasing past, present, and future, coming into the nowness of this moment. The nowness of this moment. And the more we're anchored, the more we're centered, the more we are grounded in the nowness of this moment, the more we get to be like the trees, which to me is such a beautiful analogy. The secret of the trees. And what is the secret of the trees? What is it that allow the trees to remain standing even in the midst of a raging storm? Even in the midst of thunder, even in the midst of hail, even in the midst of drought and floods. I know that not all trees remain standing, but most. So what is their secret? Their secret is that their roots run so deep into the ground. And this is such a beautiful analogy, reminding us that we need to have our presence roots running so deep into the nowness of this moment that nothing disturbs us. That we get to remain untouched and unmoved by external conditions and circumstances. And please do not hear that this means that we move oblivious, that we withdraw from the world, that we lose our compassion, that we lose our there was a word that I was looking for, that we become indifferent. That's not at all what it means. But when we are fully anchored and present in the nowness of this moment, because that's when we get to respond rather than react to what is going on. When we're able to respond, there is so much more power flowing through us than when we are reacting. There is so much more when we choose to respond with peace, when we choose to respond with love, when we choose to respond with kindness, compassion, generosity, as opposed to being flung into fear and worry and doubt, just doing what we believe we have to do to protect ourselves, to keep ourselves safe. When we are grounded in the nowness in this moment, we are able to be of service in such a beautiful way. Such a beautiful way. So all of this comes down to us reminding ourselves, doing the work necessary. I know the topic for today was, even in the midst of this, all is well. It turned out to be more an invitation for us to really explore and do the work necessary to build the foundation of these two pillars, trusting and practicing the presence. When we trust that all is well, when we practice the presence to the extent where we're not hijacked by the content that flows through our minds, then we are of such beautiful service. Then we're truly midwifing the new world, the world that works for everyone, where everybody's needs get to be met, where we get to be in peace, where we get to be in joy, where we get to be in harmony, where we get to be in wholeness, where we get to be in abundance, where we get to be in love, and all these beautiful things. So that's the invitation for us, to really take back our minds, to reclaim our sanity in this completely and utterly insane world that we're living in. And that's no judgment either, it's just an observation that the human consciousness is one of insanity. The collective human consciousness is one of insanity. So we need to be the beacons of light. We need to be the beacons of sanity in that, to assist, to inspire, to empower, to uplift others into insanity as well. Ourselves first and foremost, and then the rest of the world, the rest of the human race. So that's the invitation. And the question that we can ask is obviously, where am I now? Come to a stop. Where am I now? What am I engaging with? What am I attaching myself to? Am I steeped in trust? Am I steeped in presence? Or am I caught and hijacked and held hostage by the content in my mind? And just allowing that awareness to creep in. And we're wise to do this as often as possible, to come to a complete stop as often as possible during our days. Every time we have these moments in between, we're going to the bathroom, we're standing in line, we're waiting for someone, we're cooking, cleaning, taking a walk, watching TV, we're wise to come back, come to a full stop, observe, witness our minds, observe and witness where we are in consciousness, so that we get to make choices that are more in alignment with what we wish to experience and how we wish to show up and what we wish for our lives to be about. So that's the invitation and questions. Thank you so much for tuning in as always. I truly appreciate you for doing so. And those of you who are coming back, I so appreciate that you are coming back. If you're listening to this for the first time, well, I appreciate you coming back whenever that is. And also, if you found this helpful, if this resonated with you, I invite you to share this with anyone you feel, sense might benefit from hearing this. The more of us who get on this path, the more of us who do this work, the easier and the quicker the transformation of human consciousness will be. So I invite you to share, to pull others into this, onto this path as well. Not against their free will, but if they are curious, invite them in. All right. Until we meet again, thank you so much. I bless all our days, and I bless all our ways, knowing that all is well, knowing that something wonderful is happening, that everything is working for our highest good. With much love and many blessings. Namaste.